What's up, everybody? Nick Whalen, Alex Barutha back with you, coming out of the All-Star break, giving you some waiver wire options as we look ahead to the stretch run in fantasy basketball. We did have two big, I wouldn't say injury situations. One of them's an injury. The other one is just a straight up suspension for Bobby Portis. But some opportunity now presented in San Antonio with Victor Wembanyama, done for the year, dealing with that blood clot issue in his shoulder. So we'll start with the Spurs, Alex. And I would love to tell you that there's just an obvious, oh, Victor Wembanyama's out. This guy now steps up. That is not the case.
No, because Charles Bassey is injured right now. It's kind of unclear when he's supposed to come back. I think technically the Spurs do have Bismack Biyombo on a 10-day contract. We'll see if they renew that or are able to sign him to a standard deal. So I would keep that in mind if you're in a deeper league. Other than that, I mean, as of right now, it's looking like Jeremy Sochan, who is rostered in a lot of different places, but 41% on Yahoo. So if you're in a shallower league, he might be there for you. And then Sandro Mamukelashvili, who is 2% rostered and last year started 5 games. Averaged, I think it was 13 and 10 with 2 dimes. I don't know how much I trust that. This is a different roster with more high usage players on it. But and Stephon Castle, if he's not rostered in your league, which he might not be, there should be a lot more usage for him because not only is it Wembanyama's gone, they need a big. It's a lot of usage for Wembanyama as well. You're losing 25 points, 4 or 5 assists a game that they need to make up for.
I think that's the bigger point here, and I want to go a little bit deeper on Sochan in a moment. But no, you're totally right. I mean, you're taking a lot of numbers out of that starting lineup with Wembanyama, and there's not an obvious backfiller, but I think this is good for De'Aaron Fox. I think it's good for Stephon Castle. I could not help but notice that Stephon Castle's Rookie of the Year odds went from plus 140 to minus 165 earlier today. I think under the expectation that he's just going to be playing more minutes. He's going to be expected to do more. I think, in a roundabout way, it's good for Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, Devin Vassell, really everybody fantasy-wise. I mean, obviously, it's devastating for Wembanyama and knocks him out of Defensive Player of the Year competition, which is brutal. Very interested to see, by the way, if Dyson Daniels can work his way into that mix. He initially moved to 16-1 and then jumped to 12-1 at DraftKings. And I feel like in a lot of ways, Daniels is to steals what Wembanyama is to blocks. Like the Hawks actually have a better defensive rating this year than the Spurs. So I think that conversation is going to heat up. But that is a conversation for another day. I'm sure that will be had on the Friday edition of the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball Pod. In terms of Sochan, if you look at our depth charts at RotoWire, he is the number 2 center for the Spurs. He's played about 20% of his minutes at center this season, according to Basketball Reference. They've kind of cut off the Jeremy Sochan point guard experiment, partially because of Chris Paul, De'Aaron Fox, Stephon Castle. You have better options now. Realistically, can he actually play that much center? I mean, it's nice to kind of be able to mix him in there, but there are a handful of teams where really most of the league, you're picturing, okay, jump ball against Nikola Jokic to start the game. Jeremy, get out there. Like that's not going to work, right?
I don't think so. No, and part of the issue with this, and I still think he should be rostered just from a minutes standpoint. His minutes are going to increase.
Yeah.
We have our on-off court page at RotoWire, and he actually sees a negligible but slight usage decrease with Wembanyama off the court. So he's not really more involved. Even as a rebounder, it's negligible. His stats don't really change that much when Wembanyama is on the court or off the court. So I don't think he's going to be some big fantasy savior, and he's rostered in a lot of spots anyway.
I will say, to close the conversation on San Antonio, I was doing some digging on the on-off page as well. Devin Vassell, 5.5 more points per 36 with Victor Wembanyama off the court this season. And, too small of a sample right now to say exactly what it means for De'Aaron Fox, but I would not be surprised if we see a boost for Vassell. The Milwaukee Bucks will be without Bobby Portis for essentially the rest of the fantasy season. I think they have 29 games left. He's suspended for the first 25 of those. This is another situation where there's not necessarily an obvious fill-in. You got Kyle Kuzma, you got Taurean Prince. I think both of those guys will be asked to do more. It's certainly good for Kyle Kuzma in terms of his fantasy value. Jericho Sims, maybe in deeper leagues, maybe.
He's just not the same kind of player as Portis, right? The thing about Portis was that he could play power forward and center, and that he was essentially a spacing option next to Giannis because you need a spacer or a team of spacers playing around Giannis. I don't think there's really a direct one-to-one replacement here. I think it's going to be how much more can we get out of Taurean Prince, Andre Jackson, Gary Trent, AJ Green? What can we really get away with here? Not to mention Kuzma. Kuzma's going to play a lot, I think. Yeah. But the problem is he's, I think, 80% rostered in Yahoo leagues. So there's not really an actionable item there in fantasy unless the Bucks decide to start dusting off Pat Connaughton or DeLon Wright. And even then, I don't really think much is going to come of that.
Yeah, it's a bad break for Milwaukee. Tough schedule the rest of the way. Not a lot of off days for the Bucks, and obviously Giannis still nursing that calf injury. All right, let's run through real quickly some other options. Again, I encourage you to check out last week's video on the RotoWire Fantasy Basketball YouTube channel. We went deep on a lot of these names. Again, there's not a lot of turnover when we've only had one NBA game played in the last week, and that was just a
Luka
contest between the Lakers and the Hornets last night. I will say though, Alex, somebody who played in that game, Jusuf Nurkić, Mark Williams already been ruled out now on the second night of a back-to-back. We've kind of speculated as to whether or not they'll take it easy with him. I still don't really know. Like, all the quotes coming out of Charlotte are like, yeah, we don't know why the Lakers failed his physical. Like, they seem fine with Mark Williams health-wise, but Jusuf Nurkić did not score on 3 attempts on Wednesday night against the Lakers, but 8 rebounds, 7 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal.
I think it was after the second missed 3-point attempt from Jusuf Nurkić, the Lakers commentators were imploring to let success be Nurkic's guide, which I thought was a very just funny way to describe Nurkic's struggles from 3. I think Nurkić is fine to roster. The problem is he's already 69% rostered on Yahoo. I mean, it's just, if you're in an 8-team league, he might be available, but then don't pick him up if that's the case.
Well, I mean, he's like 40% rostered in ESPN, which does tend to lag behind Yahoo, but double check if you're in a shallower league. And honestly, I don't know if I even recommend that. If you're in a 10 or 12 team league, scratch that from the record. It's probably not worth dealing with him. I'm surprised that roster rate is still as high as it is. I'll give out the usual 3-point targets: Alex, Duncan Robinson, Corey Kispert. They're still out there in a bunch of leagues. Jose Alvarado certainly has some appeal. Karlo Matković for the Pelicans as well. I mean, they parted ways with Javonte Green, bought him out. Not like a huge piece for the Pelicans, but was playing some amount of minutes. You never know when Zion's going to be out there. And then, the other big piece coming out of the break is Misi dealing with that hyperextended knee. And they're saying it's not super long term, but we'll see. I mean, I think he's going to miss at least a few games.
Not super long term, but why even bother bringing him back before he's less than 100%, right? So I think Matković is somebody who we have been recommending for like a week or two. I would say just like check it out depending on what league you're in, because he has some good per minute potential. And so I think the Misi injury only helps his upside.
In a deep league, I would say you maybe take a stab on Kelly Olynyk, who is yet to play for the Pelicans, but if Misi ends up missing more time, all of a sudden he could leapfrog Matković potentially. But it's pretty bleak out there right now. The Wizards, Kyshawn George, Bub Carrington, talk about them every week. I think both those guys should be rostered in deeper leagues. Naji Marshall in Dallas has some appeal. I mean, so many guys have been in and out lately that it's been tough for me to glean like what actually matters over these last 3 or 4 games, because AD, Gafford, Lively, Kyrie, Clay each missed a game. So I'm not like super high in any of these guys. I think I would certainly pick up Christie ahead of Naji Marshall, but in terms of a name who's out there and a guy who I think will be in the mix even when some of those pieces come back, probably a little bit under rostered right now.
Yeah, I mean, so PJ Washington is questionable to make his return tomorrow, Friday. So that will cut into Marshall's upside a little bit, but they're also asking a lot of like Prosper and Exum and Brandon Williams. Like, I think there's still 30 minutes available for Marshall even when PJ Washington comes back. And I don't know. I mean, reporters were talking to Jason Kidd, who said that surgery hasn't even been ruled out for Anthony Davis. So it's just awesome. Like, yeah. So who even knows? I've talked about Marshall for a while. He just gives you enough of everything to where it's like, I think in a 14-team league, you just have to roster him. In 12s, it's kind of borderline, but it's decent outlook for the rest of the season.
Yeah, we'll take that. Decent outlook. That's where the waiver wire stands right now. Anthony Davis, by the way, will be reevaluated in 2 weeks. That's the news that we got from Dallas on Thursday, February 20th. Anybody else, Alex, on your list that is not a major repeat from last week?
I don't know if I remember if I mentioned Dalano Banton last week.
Oh yeah,
I kind of don't want to. It feels like a some sort of curse or a hex or something. But Jeremy Grant does not play in April usually, and often not in March. And they're down some guys already. So Banton got a nice couple games before the break, and we'll see what happens.
We will see. I mean, if the Spurs fall out, man, that 11 spot might be open for the Portland Trailblazers in the Western Conference. We will find out. All right, good stuff, Bam. We'll be back with more names next week. But again, I think watch this one and then watch last week's video, and you'll get a pretty good handle on who you need to be targeting coming up. And obviously with a bunch of games, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, will be a busy NBA waiver wire coming up this weekend. Alex, good stuff, man. We'll talk soon.